Welcome everyone. I always like to start presentations with a kind of show of hands just to make sure people are awake. I know it's the last day and everything. So could you please raise your hand, start with an easy one. Has everyone used open source software? Yeah, figure so. Anyone found a bug in open source software? Pretty much the same. Anyone reported a bug in open source software? Oh, okay, so quite a lot as well. Has anyone fixed a bug in open source software? Scattering of people. Well, for those that don't know me, my name is Phil Webb. I'm fortunate enough to work on open source full time. I primarily work on a project called Spring Boot. And Spring Boot was released in April of 2014. So that's quite a while ago. So you could say I'm sort of something of an expert when it comes to fixing bugs. In fact, at the time I put this presentation together, there were 4,395 bugs that we'd marked as closed in the Spring Boot issue tracker, which I guess also makes me somewhat of a bug maker myself, since I wrote a lot of that code. In fact, my sort of thought process for this presentation was, like I'm an expert at fixing bugs, and then, that means I'm an expert at making bugs as well. So here's what we're going to do with this presentation. I want to talk a little bit about what is a bug, what is debugging, at least in the context of this presentation, how you should report bugs if you have an issue to raise, and then for the last half of the presentation, what I want to do is take issues that have been raised in the Spring Boot issue tracker and take a look at them and see if there's techniques that we can use or lessons that we can learn from them. And just as a bit of a disclaimer, all of the issues are real, and the people that raise them are real. And we're not trying to kind of pick on anyone or make them feel bad. It's just about using them to kind of guide our learnings. So what do we mean by a bug? I think most people think of bugs as kind of like catastrophic failures, that crash your application, cause big problems. And it's certainly true that crashes are probably the primary ones that people think about. But having done this for a while, I can tell you there are a number of issues that are kind of a little bit more subtle than that, like performance issues. You might have an application that works absolutely fine, but the new version is suddenly slower, or it might consume more memory, or it might be an environment-specific issue. Like you might find that maybe it's all three. Maybe it's an app that when you deploy it to a Docker container, the memory consumption causes a performance issue. Or it might be an upgrade issue. You might have an app that's working absolutely fine, but it's depending either directly or indirectly on something, and then the ground moves under its feet, and you suddenly find that the app that you delivered stops working because something else has been upgraded. And what do I mean by debugging? And for this presentation, I just mean any technique at all that you can use to remove a bug. So I'm talking not just about classic breakpoints and stepping over code, although we will cover that. I'm talking about anything at all that has helped us to get to the bottom of an issue. So let's start with reporting a bug. When you think about open source, especially, I kind of broadly categorize open source into two areas. There's someone who has had this wonderful idea and decided to release it as open source and is trying to support it as a side hustle, as a side project. That's one side. And then there's someone like me who is fortunate enough to get paid to work on commercial open source. And either way, they're kind of both facing a problem. The person who's doing it as a side hustle is probably thinking to themselves, why did I ever start this? I'm getting a non-stop stream of issues coming in. What was I thinking? And even in the commercial world, there's guaranteed to be someone in the company, some manager type, that's asking very similar questions. Why are we giving this away for free? Whichever way you cut it, we kind of the open source maintainers are a limited resource, and they probably don't have a lot of time. So when it comes to issues, I'm kind of breaking it down into three parts. There's reproduce the issue, reporting the issue, and then repairing the issue. So we're going to go through all of these like one at a time. Let's start with reproducing an issue. So as open source maintainers, what we love is if you report an issue, if you can provide a link to a GitHub project, or you can attach a zip file to that issue that reproduces the problem, then you are our friends. That should be ideally as small as possible. We don't want your entire application. We don't want all your proprietary company code. We just want something that reproduces the issue and only the issue. Like ideally in the same language as the project's written in. So Spring Boot is like 95% Java and a little bit of like Kotlin. So unless the issue is due to only occurs in the language you're using, then ideally give us a sample in the same language. That'll give us the least friction. You're free to use Lombok in your own code, but please, if you submit a sample, again, keep the dependencies to a minimum. Try not to use Lombok in the samples. And always use the latest patch of a supported version. So most software follows the major minor patch like pattern. Like major is like if you upgrade, it's a major pain in the butt. Minor is like a minor pain in the butt. Patch should be no butt pain like at all. And what we want is major and minor should be supported. That means we're prepared to fix your bug if it's a supported version. And the patch version wants to be like the very latest in that supported branch. The reason for that is, first of all, someone else might have reported the issue and it might already be fixed. So just getting on the latest patch may solve your problem. And the second reason is if we're going to try and fix it, we're probably going to start with the latest patch version because that's probably going to be pretty close to what's in our GitHub repository. With Spring Boot, if you want to know which versions are supported, you can go to spring.io, click on the boot project, and then the support tab will give you the versions. So here you can see that 3.4 and 3.3 are supported for open source. 3.5 is not yet released. And the earlier versions, 3.2, 3.1, down to 2.7, are available only for commercial customers. So if you raise an open source issue against those, we'll ask you to upgrade first. And if you do want to create a sample project, start.spring.io is a good way to kind of get started. It will create you like the build file and the dependencies that you need. And lots of open source projects have something similar, or they may have something in their reference docs as a way of getting started with their code. It's always a good place to kind of begin if you're creating a kind of small sample application. So one of us is going to be the problem, right? It's either going to be me or it's going to be you. And one advantage of the putting together a sample is you kind of make sure it's me. And remember, like my time is limited, or whoever's time you're interacting with is probably limited. And the sample really kind of helps prove that the problem is with the open source software. Here's like an example from the issue tracker. So I'm going to show like lots of these little snippets. You don't read it all. It's just to kind of give you a feel. So this one was raised in 2024. This person's saying, I'm upgrading from Spring Boot 2.7. Skip the details, but something's not working. Brian from the team has popped up and says, please share a minimal sample that fails with 3.3 and works with 2.7. And the person's come back and said, I just noticed my application was using bootstrap configuration, not auto configuration. My bad, ha ha. So you can see just the act of putting together the sample that reproduces the problem has helped this person identify that in this particular case, they were the problem, not me. And Brian said, thanks for letting us know. What about reporting an issue? So when you report an issue to open source, most projects will want at least the following three things. Full stack trace if you've got one, the versions that you're using, and ideally like the version of the app and details about your OS and the versions that you're using there, and any kind of logs that you can provide that will give us insight. And the nice thing about the reproducer is it kind of gives us all this information, so we don't need to kind of ask for it. My other only real advice if you're raising an issue is to look at how the bug system you're using supports formatted text. So if we look at the big kind of three bug systems, Jira has got this thing called Jira Markup. GitHub has got something called GitHub Flavor Markdown. Bugzilla's got like a myriad of plugins that you can use. I think you can support Markdown with Bugzilla, but it really depends on the particular project. So if we just focus on these two, I'm going to teach you the only two bits of markup that you really need. There's more that you can learn, but these two are the ones that you want to kind of get in your head. The first is if you want to do like some monospace text in a sentence. So with Jira, it's like two little squigglies, and with GitHub, it's backticks. And the second one is if you want to do a block of text, and this is probably the most important because people constantly paste stack traces or snippets of code and forget to do this, and then the text is all over the place. If you do that format, like no format in Jira and 3 backticks in GitHub, you'll get like a block move. So Java, in their infinite wisdom, decided to use the @ symbol as annotations, and Spring's very big on annotations. GitHub, in their wisdom, decided to use the @ symbol as meaning email the person that belongs to this account and tell them about this issue. So if you don't put backticks around annotations, what you're doing is sending a notification to the user Bean, who does actually exist in GitHub and has probably been getting emails since 2014. One more little quick tip for GitHub especially. Hidden in the top are those little 3 dots. If you click on that, there's an edit option. So if you do mess up the formatting and you realize it looks terrible, just go and edit it. It's fine. All right, let's move on to the bulk of this presentation, which is about repairing. And so for this, I wanted to do like a day in the life of an open source maintainer, which you probably think, looks something like this. And the reality is kind of more like this. We do want to do new features as well, and but we also have to support the previous ones that we tried to work on. So what we're going to do is we're going to look through highlights from the Spring Boot issue tracker. Each of these each section is going to have like a little bug number. This is the issue number. And then something useful that we learnt from this issue. So something that me or you can take away from it. If you want to go and look at the kind of original source of the pain, then this is how you can convert the issue number into a URL and actually go and look at the full details and the fixes that went in. Okay, let's start with 26732, and we're going to learn about Git and GitHub Basics. So this is a good, I picked this one because it's kind of a good introduction issue. It was from 2021. This person's done a good job with reporting it. They've given us a nice description of like what's going on. They've told us the version they're using. Great. They've given us a way to reproduce the problem. It's not quite as good as if they'd attached a zip file or a GitHub link, but it's a close second, so that's nice. They've given us a full stack trace, which is what we want. And they've even been so kind as to point at the bit of code that they think is probably responsible for this problem. And as a bit of an aside, I think a lot of people know GitHub's very good at putting code like front and center. And if you want to, you maybe can't see that very well, but this bit is highlighted on the presentation. If you want to highlight a line of code, you can click in the ruler. Lots of people know that. If you press Shift, you can select a block. A few more people probably know that. But the tip I want to give you is if you press Y, then what GitHub will do is convert that link into like a permalink. So it'll pick the link at the point in time that you made it. And that can be super useful if you're working on, if it's an active project, say you want to link to an area on main, And then maybe the project goes and changes all the headers or something, adds more copyrights. Suddenly all your lines shift. If you use the Y links, you will get links that don't shift because they're at a particular point in time. GitHub's also super flexible, so each project, I mean, it's a pro and a con. Each project can kind of run things the way they want. But this sidebar normally is pretty typically used in a kind of similar way. So for Spring Boot, we have an assignee. So if someone's assigned to that issue, that means that they're either planning to work on it or they've started working on it. If it's unassigned, then it's kind of free-for-all. We have labels. So we have labels for different types of issue. So in this case, it was a regression, like a problem that we've introduced in the new version that used to not be there. And then the milestone tells you the earliest version that you can expect this to be fixed in. So what we do is we have like an X version. So we'll have 2.5.x when it's like, OK, we think this is a bug, and this is the version we'd like to fix it in. And then when we fix it, we put it to a kind of fixed version. So you can normally tell by looking at an issue, OK, when was it actually fixed? So in this case, 2.5.1. And what you'll also sometimes see, each project does it differently. But what we do in Boot is we fix the earliest version, and then we merge the fix forward and create duplicate issues. So you might also see linked issues that show that this issue was fixed in like 2.5.1, but it was also fixed in like 2.6. I've said, thank you very much. I've fixed it, I think. I want to show you this little section here. This is GitHub's nice because it's got this complete top-to-bottom integration. So every time I commit something, I'm going to get a link to the issue that closed. A link to the commit that closed the issue. And you can see here as well, we spend a lot of time putting effort into commit messages. And I highly recommend that you also do the same in your own projects. For us, we have like a one-line description. Then we have a detailed block of text. And then at the end, we have a link to the issue that related to this commit. The reason you want to do that is, I like this quote that says, always code as if the person who ends up maintaining your code will be a psychopath who knows where you live. Lots of people have said that quote before. I sort of adapt it to commit messages. Always write your commit messages as if the person maintaining your code will be just a super forgetful version of you. Because having done this job for like 10 years, I'm amazed sometimes when I go back to code and what idiot wrote this, and I discover it was me. And good commit messages really do make a difference. Especially if you want to use the tool Git Blame, and on GitHub there's like a Blame tab. If you've taken the time to write excellent commit messages, then every line of code that you hover over on Git Blame, you will have the reason behind it. So it is a tremendously useful debugging technique. It just doesn't pay off immediately. It only pays off years down the line.
Do you have a way to enforce good commit style?
So the question is, do we have a way to enforce good commit style? I've heard of some people doing Git commit hooks, which can sometimes help. But we just, as a team, because the majority of us have adopted it, like any new people joining the team, they kind of naturally do it. And for contributors, we often fix up their commit messages for them. All right, 2.6.6.3. Learn stack traces and tests. So this one is, when's this? 2021. This person's upgrading to Spring Boot 2.5.0, and they've got a problem, and they've got a null pointer exception. They very helpfully provided the complete stack trace. And I do mean the complete stack trace. The bottom bit is very important. Please provide it. Don't just give us the top. And what I want to show you here is how I would typically use the stack trace inside my IDE to kind of find the area of code that's likely to be the culprit. So please don't judge me, but I use Eclipse. I'm going to go over to Eclipse here in a minute. What I've got here is a project that reproduces the problem. Normally this would be my Git checkout, but because this is such an old issue, I've just created like a throwaway project that's got the right version and the dependency that we need. And what I would typically do is just copy this stack trace, and then in Eclipse you can create a new console window called a stack trace console. I think there's a plugin for IntelliJ that lets you do the same thing. And what you can do is just paste the stack trace in here, and it gives you the stack trace but clickable. So right here, I can click on this particular area and say, okay, this is the cause. So this is the null pointer. This bit's slightly out of sync because my JDK version is different. This password was probably null that I got passed in here. So I'm going to work back up the stack. This value here must be the problem. That must be null. So I'm going to work up again. Again, the value here is probably the null. And here looks like the value that we pass in here is the problem. So it looks like this map might be the issue. We're getting a value out of this map, and it's null, and that's probably the line of code that I need to fix, or someone needs to fix. In this case, the someone was Stefan, and he said, yeah, there's a regression, and the problem was we used to not call the setter when it was null, and now we do. And the fix was like, if you don't count the curly braces, it's like one line of code. If the value is not equal null, do something. The interesting thing about this commit, if you go and look at it on GitHub, is that although the fix was one line of code, we also put like 4 tests in with this commit. And we do this quite often. It's a great way to kind of stop stuff coming back. More often than not, you kind of need to write a test to reproduce the problem in the first place. So why not commit that with your code fix, and then you know this issue is not going to come back in a future version of Spring Boot. Or if it does come back and the test fails, and I've written a good commit message, I'm able to do Git Blame on the test and find out why that test was added in the first place. Okay, 44137. We're going to look at breakpoints here. This is kind of classic debugging. So I've got an issue. This one is relatively recent, like 2 weeks ago, and it's causing problems with, we have a problem with the way that banners work. So Spring Boot has support for banner text files. So if you don't like our logo, you can create this banner.txt file, and you can put whatever you want in there. And one of the things we support is variable resolution. And we use the syntax that Spring Framework supports, which is $ squiggly brackets and then the name of a variable. And if you want to, you can then provide a fallback. So if you put a colon and then a fallback value, what should happen is if the value is not there, we use the fallback. And this person's saying, well, fallbacks just aren't working. So it's a bug for sure, and we should fix it. So I want to go through now the kind of process I would typically do if I want to try and find where to provide a fix for this issue. So I've got, I'm going to get started. I've got a reproducer here. What I've done is I've taken that test, and I've got that in to the code, but I haven't taken the fix from this commit. So you can see here we've got a test that fails. There's a Spring Boot version and a fallback, and it's not working. So I'm going to just dig into the code and try and find a good starting point. And I think this looks like a pretty good starting point. Print banner sounds like a method that I'm going to be interested in. So I'm going to start with a breakpoint there. I'm going to step over this and look at what we've got. So if I look at my variables, I can see that here the banner, that looks like the original source. Then we're doing some property resolving of some sort. And then the banner that comes out here, that's the one that's got the missing stuff. We've got like 2 dots instead of the resolved thing. I'm going to drop to frame here. This is like an undo button for debugging. I'm going to replay this because I want to dig into this resolve placeholders. This is probably where the issue really lies. So we have some kind of helper. Doesn't look that interesting. So do resolve placeholders. Maybe that's the code. This is not my code. This is other people's code, so I'm kind of new to it. Here I've jumped into some Java code. I don't want that because it's annoying, so I've put step filtering on here, which will stop me jumping into JVM code. Jump back out, resolve placeholders. So it looks like this replace placeholders might be useful. Create some context. This resolve looks good. This looks like super interesting. Here we've got like some parts, and this resolve seems like it might be the method we want. And it looks like there's text parts and placeholder parts. So it looks like the placeholder ones are the ones that I'm interested in, and I'm going to step into this code. And here I can see a string builder. So this is immediately giving me a clue that this is probably building up the output string. Jump into the text part. That's just sticking out the text unchanged. Not very interesting. Maybe the next one is more interesting. Okay, here's the useful part. I'm in simple placeholder, and I can see here that there's like a fallback, and that's what it should be returning. So obviously my fallback is not working there. And at this point I'm getting nervous because I've been debugging a while, and I want to be able to get back to this point quickly. So I'm going to add a breakpoint here, and I'm going to stop so that I can kind of replay and get to the area that I actually am interested in. So I'm going to disable my first breakpoint and just use the second one. I'm going to show you a couple of techniques. We're in here, and I'm getting the simple placeholder, and that one doesn't interest me. I'm only interested in the second call. So I'm going to show you a couple of techniques you can use to get to that. The first is with hit counts. So hit counts is just the number of times that breakpoint gets hit. When it reaches 2, stop. It's useful, but if I'm honest, it's not something I use all that often. What I tend to do more often than not is use conditional breakpoints, which are a way of saying, okay, stop on this breakpoint if a particular condition is true. Now, I need a condition, and I can't quite remember what it is. So what I'm going to do here is do another technique that I like, where you can do sort of poor person's console logging. I'm doing a sysout and then not triggering the breakpoint and running the entire app. So the app runs, but I get this kind of extra info, and I'm using that to grab the thing that I want. So now I know that springboot.version, that's what I want to stop on, and I'm going to stop when this key equals that. And at this point, I've now got to the point where I can just debug this again and get straight to the bit of code that I'm interested in. Right, let's dig in a bit more now. So we're going into this recursively resolve method, resolve recursively. Let's just step into that. This looks kind of useful. We're getting the property here. So that's the property, and it's got the fallback. So it looks like it runs through a bunch of property sources. And what we should have is like a null response from this, so the fallback works. And I can see here I've got like, what's that, 5 property sources. So one of them is going to have like a non-null value, I guess. And that's what's causing me the problem. So I put a breakpoint there and just carry on. And I can now see that my my value that gets returned here is an empty string. And that's wrong. That should be null, because otherwise the fallback's not going to work. So what I'm going to do now is dig through these sources and find out, well, which one of these sources that backs that property source, which one of those is actually causing the problem. And it looks to me like it's the map property source. So I need to find out what populated that map property source, because that's really what's causing the problem. So I'm going to do a constructor breakpoint here, and I'm going to make it conditional because I only want it to stop when we are introducing a map property source that contains a map that has a key that is the springboot.version thing that is returning an empty string instead of null. I'm going through again. So right here I can see that my source has indeed got that wrong value. Work up the stack. I need to then jump into this get versions method, so I'm going to do drop to frame again, that undo button. Jump into that. This looks like it's where it's putting stuff into the map. And if I jump into this version string thing, there is my problem. I've got a version here that is null, but instead of returning null, it's returning an empty string. I'm just going to do one little step further to prove that I think I can fix this issue. And I'm going to do it without editing the code. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on here and on the test. And then I'm going to run this again. I'm going to get to the point where I'm returning this empty string. And I'm going to take off step filtering so I can jump into the JDK code where it's putting it in the map. And here you can see the put has got a key and a value. And I think my hypothesis is if that value is null rather than an empty string, things will work. So I'm going to change the value in memory without changing the code. And I'm going to do that for the two ones that we have a fallback for. So right here, I'm going to do change value again, set it to null. And then I'm going to let the app run. I'm not interested in these next two. I'm just going to let those pass. And here I can check that the banner output has indeed got those fallbacks and the test is green. So at this point, I'm pretty confident that I've identified the area in the code that's causing the problem, and I've probably got a rough idea of how to fix it. And Andy actually did fix this, and we fixed it 2 weeks before I took the screenshot. I won't show you the fix because it's actually a bit more in depth than I made out, but if you're interested, you can go to the issue and take a look at it. Here's the commit message. Again, just to reiterate, this is the level of detail that we try and put in the commit messages. Very useful. 42317 is debugging without a debugger. So this one is interesting. This person raised an issue, and they're using a third-party library. And we said, well, we think the problem is with that library. It's not us, it's with that library. So please go and raise an issue with them. And they've come back and raised another issue, sort of saying, well, I think it's you. And we've sort of said, well, please give them a chance to respond. And the person's come back and said, yes, okay, I'll wait for a bit. And then Andy said, well, if it's a boot problem, can you give us a sample that reproduces it without this third-party library? And the person's come back and said, sure, here's a wall of YAML for you. And we were like, no, we really, we're not after the YAML. We don't want to piece it together ourselves. Give us a zip file or a GitHub project. And the person's come back and with a little bit of interesting information here saying that this problem only happens when they have a particular setting in their application properties. Okay. Finally, they come back with a demo and some instructions. And Andy's like, you've given us a demo, which is great, but it's still using this third-party library. And we're trying to get to the point where we know it's our problem and not theirs. And they've come back again and appreciate the requirements. And this person's not being difficult or anything. We're trying to guide them through it. But at this point, it's kind of clear that we're probably going to spend long trying to guide them through the process than just digging in a little bit and seeing if the problem's real or not. So at this point, I'm like, OK, I'm going to get to the bottom of this and prove that it's this library that's causing the issue and not us. So I get to the point where I've got this demo downloaded, and I'm just having a quick inspection of it in VS Code just to kind of look at the files and not run it or anything. I can see it's using, this is the library that I think is causing the problem, the Spring Docs one. And I can see it's a WebFlux app, and I can see it's using React-Ineti. So what I'm going to do is just run the sample app that they've given us. The sample app runs, which is nice. And I've got a command here, like curl command. And what they're complaining about is if they put this X forward header prefix as a header coming in, they've put BFF. What they expect is that location that comes out to include that BFF prefix, and it doesn't. So at this point, I'm pretty, I've got it in my mind that it's this library. So I'm going to find out and find, in here, I'm going to find that they're missing a call to set that header. That's what I assume. So I start searching for the set location method that I know it would call. And at this point, my kind of bubble is burst because clearly this library is doing the right thing. It is calling set location. So the chances are the problem is not with that library, So maybe it is with us. So I go back to the YAML and I'm like, well, they said that it only happens when this strategy is set to native. And I know from the code base that that property is bound to this thing called server properties. There's the forward header strategy, and this is the enum that it maps to. So I'm doing find usages here to see if I can find where native is used. It's used in like Jetty, Undertow, Tomcat, and Netty, and I know Netty is what they're using. So I'm going to dig into this one. I can see here it's returned from this method as a Boolean, I guess. That seems to be passed through to this method. That's setting it to some field. Let's look at the usages of that. That looks like it's called here, and right here is where it's actually adding something that looks like it does the functionality. And at this point, I can see the problem almost immediately. So they're using X forwarded prefix here. And if I look at this code, I can see that that is not one of the things that's listed in this set of constants. Good news is this is not my code or our code. The bad news is it is someone on the teams, but it's not the third-party project that I thought it was. So from here, I'm able to say, okay, here's a link to the Swagger code. It's doing the right thing. This is why forward works and native does. Framework works and native doesn't. And then I open an issue with the React and Netty team to say, hey, you've had a previous issue. I managed to find a duplicate that was like it had been discussed before, and you declined it, but it's come up again. Maybe you want to reconsider. And 2 weeks later, someone put a fix into React and Netty. We just needed to upgrade to get the fix. This one is locus alert, so 37648. I'm getting more bigger numbers. Location, localization, and test coverage. This one is to highlight that no matter how many tests you write and you think you cover everything, it's very difficult to cover everything. So this person, bear in mind that when this issue was raised, this title has been edited since then. So the title makes it look like we knew what the problem was from the beginning, but we didn't. This problem is saying that they're getting a null pointer exception because a field in some JSON that gets returned is null. So our first thought, Scott gets involved, and our first thought is we think maybe something's changed in the JSON. So maybe it's the Docker Compose stuff that we're calling to parse the JSON response. Maybe that's changed. So we ask about the version that they're using, and then Scott says, well, maybe you could try, like using the same version that we test with, downgrading, and see if that works. So the person's like trying to help, and then Scott discovers that actually, no, it's not that. Although the JSON has changed, it should be compatible. We've already dealt with that. So keep digging. At this point, I pop up like an idiot and start complaining that I don't understand how it can possibly be wrong. Can't be our code, and says maybe they've somehow installed a custom version of Jackson or changed their class path or something, which is really grasping at straws. But I'm still convinced that it can't possibly be null. I'm trying to suggest a few more things they can do to help debug, and then out of the blue, this person pops up from the community and informs us that I think the problem might be the system locale. So in this particular case, what's happening is Docker PS is putting out the output in uppercase, and Jackson is lowercasing it. And it turns out that if you're in like most locales, that's absolutely fine. However, if you're in Turkey, and only Turkey, then the lowercase I does not have a dot. It's a different character that they use there. So in Turkey, this bug comes up, and we obviously foolishly didn't think of putting in a test to make sure that things work in Turkey. But this this person, I'm so grateful for them because I think we'd have been stuck on it for years. Maritz pops up and is like, yes, that's it. I can reproduce it now. Here's a sample that solves it. And the fix turns out to be like one line of code. It's just set some Jackson settings. But the point here is it's kind of almost impossible to guess all these issues. Somewhat related is environment-specific issues. So here's, this is actually not a bug. This is an enhancement that I was working on. Spring Boot supports structured logging, and you can have stack traces. And the feature was we put in fairly last minute, and we wanted to do a bit more support to it with the Lex version. So I was working quite late on this, and I was quite happy with the result. I'd run the build locally, at least 10 times, I'm sure. So I was pretty confident. I was going to commit it and go to bed. And of course, I committed it. There's my commit. There's my nice commit message. And almost immediately got like a notification from GitHub because all of the Linux builds worked fine and all of the Windows builds didn't. And I'm on a Mac, which is kind of closer to Linux than Windows. This comes up so many times you wouldn't believe. If you've got an issue that happens on Windows and not on Linux, it's almost always either because you used a / instead of a \, or it's because of character return line feeds at the end of files, which Windows does as, I can't remember which one it is, just one character instead of two, or the other way around. Anyway, it's so common that if you use an assertion library like assert.j, there's helper methods to kind of work around the problem. So I thought I'd fix it here by just changing to the is equal to normalizing new lines. So I did that and then went to bed. And then Andy had to come up and, he's in the UK, I'm in the US. So he was able to take over and actually fix my mess and solve the problem. And if you think that kind of stuff is Windows only, it's not. Here's an example way back from 2016. And what we used to do here was we used to log the host name as the app starts. And on certain Mac systems, that would turn out to be really slow for some reason. There's a Stack Overflow question about it that's got a gazillion upvotes. And the fix that we had was to simply time how long it took. And if it took a long time and they were running on a Mac, suggest that they might want to edit their host file to make it quicker. We are running short on time, and I can't speed this up because it's all recorded. But let's go through, what is this one? Test pollution. Okay, so this is another example that happens quite often. This was a bug that I was fixing, but the thing I want to show you is kind of unrelated to this bug. It's just a good deed that I was doing that, as typically when you do good deeds, got punished. So I was working on this code, and I was looking at the test suite. And if you run all the test suite, you can see, well, just this particular set of tests for this class. Everything's green. And I was working on one particular feature. So I was just running 1 or 2 tests independently. I wasn't really running the whole build because that's too slow. So I was just running those 2 tests. And I saw this line of code and I thought, oh, that could be a static final. That could be a constant. Aren't I great? So I extracted it and I continued fixing the feature, working on the bug, running these 2 independent tests, and everything's green. So that kind of looks fine. But when I did a full build, what happened was the tests that were green independently fell in a heap. And this is test pollution. So this means that some test earlier that ran has polluted the state of things. And if we dig into this a bit more, it looks like this is a safe class to kind of make static. But if I go up one more level, which I should have done, we have some volatile fields here. And that means we are storing state that could be different. So what's happening is some of the earlier tests are running, and this is a sort of caching technique to make performance good. It's storing that stuff, and then the later tests are running, and it's failing because they've polluted it. Okay, I'm going to have to run through this one, but upgrades suck. We are doing a Docker Compose upgrade here. So what happens here is we have a Docker Compose support. We pass some JSON that comes out of it. Moritz is trying to fix this issue, and he said, I've raised an issue with Docker Compose. There's the issue that he raised, and they come back and say, you need to use this flag -- orphans = false. Mirts is like, that's great, that did the trick. I've even written an integration test. So like, everything's absolutely perfect. No. So what we've done here is accidentally raise the baseline. So it turns out that the orphans flag was introduced with version of Docker 2.23, and we document that we support an earlier version. And this is like another typical problem that is very hard to write tests or anticipate those kind of issues. This is another one. I'm not going to go through this now because we're so short on time, but it boils down to the fact that we had a couple of MIME types that we supported, and in a Docker upgrade, things just changed from tar.gzip to .tar plus gzip. I'm sure if I'd read the spec of the thing that I was implementing, I'd have probably noticed that, but I didn't read the spec. I just kind of wrote the code based on the existing way things were, and when they changed, it broke. Okay, so to summarize, sorry about rushing at the end, but I think bugs are like totally inevitable. Having done this for so long, I think it's impossible to write any software that's useful without encountering some form of bug. But I think Java has like some of the best debugging tools that you can find. The fact that it's a virtual machine really gives you this great insight. You need to write tests, like high quality software needs tests. And really, just thanks for all the issue reports that you do send in. We may be a bit grumpy sometimes on the issue tracker, but we really do appreciate the, all the issues help make the software more robust and better. With that, it looks like I'm done. All right. Thank you very much.